Kelly Clayton was born in New York City in the United States of America. She had always led a life full of challenges. In her mid-20s, she was working as a stable teacher, but she realized she had to pursue her dream before it was too late. That dream, which she had held for a long time, was to become a model, so she threw herself into that line of work. She thought that if she worked hard, it would all come together. However, things did not go as smoothly as she had hoped, and in the end, she still needed to earn money in practical ways, so she started a part-time job at a cocktail bar. One day, while she was working her usual shift, a man came in and ordered a cocktail. The moment Kelly locked eyes with him, her heart skipped a beat. She fell in love at first sight. He had a solid physique, a tall frame, and broad shoulders that suggested he worked out. And anyone would agree he was an attractive man. He was Thomas Clayton, an ice hockey player. That day, the two of them exchanged phone numbers, enjoyed a date or two, and ended up falling in love. Their passionate romance led them to plan a wedding. Everything went smoothly. They had two beautiful children together, their first daughter, Charlie, and then their second child, a son named Cullen. They built a happy family. Around this time, Thomas retired from playing ice hockey and established his own company, showing remarkable talent as a businessman. About 7 or 8 years passed in their married life until Monday evening, September 28th, 2015. Kelly was at home alone, taking care of the two children. Thomas, her husband, played poker with friends every Monday night, so on that particular evening, only the three of them were at home. At around 10 o'clock at night, when everyone was ready for bed, Kelly put the children to sleep and went to her own bedroom. The moment she lay down, worn out from the long day, she quickly fell asleep. At that same time, Thomas was playing poker with 5 people, including his close friend, Linda Miller. Those who were there that night recalled it being fairly ordinary. The only thing worth noting, they said, was that a hunting cabin happened to come up in conversation during the poker game. While they were playing, one friend mentioned needing help transporting a hunting cabin. Thomas said, "I think I can help," because he ran a company that handled restoration and support when there were local fires or floods. That meant he had the heavy equipment necessary for moving the cabin. Thomas readily agreed to do this favor for his friend, saying that he would call one of his employees right away to set things up. He reached into his pocket to make the call, but realized he did not have his phone with him. Flustered, he remarked that he must have left his phone at home, so he borrowed Linda's phone instead. At around 10:50 at night, he called Michael Beard, a former employee of his, to offer him a side job. It was something along the lines of, "My friend needs help, so could you bring the equipment and take care of the work?" After a few minutes on the phone, Thomas came back to the table and continued playing poker. Meanwhile, about 40 minutes after that call, at around 11:30 at night, someone stealthily entered the Claytons' house, where Kelly and the two children were fast asleep. The sensor light at the entrance switched on, indicating that someone had slipped inside. He was carrying a heavy hammer. It appeared that he had a very specific target in mind, heading straight for the second-floor bedroom. There, upon seeing Kelly asleep, he raised the hammer high and brought it down on her head with a hard blow. Thud! Kelly awoke in shock, feeling as though her head was about to split open from the pain. In front of her stood a masked intruder. She pushed him away and ran outside the bedroom, but the intruder seemed determined not to let her escape, chasing her ferociously. Spotting Kelly racing madly down the stairs, he threw the hammer at her. Fortunately, the hammer grazed past Kelly and hit the wall, falling to the floor. At that moment, Charlie, the eldest daughter, woke up in the living room because she heard repeated loud noises. Charlie emerged from her room calling, "Mom!" and the sound alerted Kelly. In that instant, the intruder caught up with Kelly and she was brutally killed. Even more horrifying, Charlie, who was only 7 years old, saw everything. The intruder, apparently focused only on Kelly, left immediately after killing her. He ran past Charlie and slipped out of the house. The man having departed, the little girl remained near her mother, who was covered in blood, crying helplessly. At around 12:30 at night, Thomas returned from his poker game and arrived at the house. It was about 1 hour after his wife had been killed. The moment he opened the door, he heard his daughter crying and started searching for her. Following the sound into the kitchen, he found Kelly lying lifeless in a pool of blood. Charlie tearfully told her father there had been a robber. Thomas's first instinct was to evacuate the children, so he woke Cullen, the youngest child who had been asleep, and ran with both children to a neighbor's house. Then he returned home and placed a call to 911. He said, "My wife is dead. Please help." He sounded extremely rattled, hardly able to calm himself. Shortly afterward, the police arrived on the scene and confirmed that Kelly had died after being struck multiple times with a blunt object. Thomas told them he thought there had been a burglary, but the police felt something was off when they looked around the house. When there is a burglary, the home typically shows signs of disorder or theft, yet the house had no evidence of forced entry or missing valuables. One aspect that particularly troubled the police was that the killer left Charlie, a witness, alive. This strongly suggested a premeditated crime targeting Kelly alone. The husband, Thomas, became the primary suspect, and a full search of the house commenced. The police also spoke with neighbors, asking if they had seen any suspicious men that day or noticed anything unusual about Thomas. Despite the interviews, no critical evidence emerged. They realized that the only way to solve the case might be through the one eyewitness, Charlie. A few days after the incident, Charlie met with the police. To put the child at ease, they chatted casually first, asking about her interests to establish a friendlier atmosphere. After confirming that Charlie was calm enough, the investigators began asking direct questions about what had happened on the day in question. The child answered, haltingly, "I woke up because I heard a banging sound outside. When I came out of my room, there was a man hitting my mom with a hammer. My mom was lying on the floor in the kitchen, and as soon as she saw me, she grabbed onto the man's leg and yelled to me, 'Charlie, it's a robber! Run away fast!'" At the time of the attack, upon noticing Charlie, Kelly had clung desperately to the intruder's leg, trying to buy her daughter enough time to escape. The next question from the police was about the attacker's appearance. Here, Charlie revealed something crucial. He was wearing dark blue jeans and a long-sleeved shirt with a mask over his face. When the investigators asked if she had ever seen such clothes or a mask before, she hesitated, then carefully nodded. Then she said a single sentence that confirmed the police's suspicions. "That person looked like my dad. His mask and jeans looked the same." It was an incredible revelation for a child to make. The police wanted to arrest Thomas immediately, but there was one obstacle. He had a perfect alibi. Everyone who had played poker with him that night confirmed that he never left the game until midnight. Because of that, the police suspected that Thomas had hired someone to kill Kelly. By examining his phone records and the closed-circuit television at his company, they quickly discovered the identity of the hired murderer. That man was Michael, a former employee of Thomas's company. Does that name sound familiar? Yes, he was the very person Thomas had called from Linda's phone during the poker game. 12 days before the incident, Michael had quit his job, and at the same time, Thomas had offered him some temporary work. Because Michael was struggling financially, he accepted, and for those 12 days, they stayed in contact and developed a plan. The police suspected that the call Thomas made to Michael right before the killing served as the signal. In addition to being employer and employee, the two men had a landlord-tenant relationship. Thomas owned another apartment besides his own home, and Michael lived there. They were somewhat friendly, and Michael often helped with Thomas's work. On some occasions, Michael was invited to the Claytons' home to spend time with the family. Kelly and the children liked him a lot. He was like a fun uncle. Because Michael visited the Claytons' home frequently, he had become very familiar with the layout, which let him commit the crime swiftly, without confusion. After the police confronted Michael with their findings, he confessed everything. Indeed, Michael had already quit working for the company 12 days before the incident, and Thomas, knowing that Michael had financial troubles, had proposed that he kill Kelly. Why did Thomas do this? It turned out he had been involved in affairs with more than 3 women in town. Kelly discovered these relationships and intended to get a divorce, but Thomas did not want that. Was it out of love? No. He simply despised the idea of splitting his assets. He therefore decided to get rid of Kelly for financial reasons. He reasoned that if she died, he could collect life insurance money and keep his entire fortune. It seemed like a perfect solution to him. Thomas told Michael to kill Kelly on the night of September 28, 2015, and gave him the key to the house. Then, Thomas created his alibi by playing poker at the time of the crime. At around 11:30 that night, Michael put on a mask, covered his face, and headed to the house to kill Kelly. Using the house key Thomas had given him, he easily let himself in. He had already brought along a hammer. Michael crept silently to Kelly's bedroom to take her life, but events did not unfold as he expected. Kelly managed to run, and her daughter Charlie ended up witnessing the whole thing. Thomas's deal with Michael had been only to kill Kelly, leaving the children unharmed. All Michael cared about was getting paid, so he killed Kelly even with her child present, then left Charlie alone and fled. After that, Michael drove along a highway to dispose of the evidence, throwing the hammer out of the car window at a desolate spot. He headed to a swamp, where he threw out his blood-stained clothes, his bag, and the house key. After hearing his confession, the police immediately searched the highway and the swamp. They located the hammer, the key, and the discarded clothes, all exactly as Michael had described. His deoxyribonucleic acid was found on the blood-stained clothing, matching Charlie's description of what the killer had been wearing. In November 2016, Michael Beard went to trial. Unexpectedly, he withdrew his confession during the trial. He said that, although he had indeed made an agreement with Thomas, it was to commit arson, not murder. He claimed he went there to set fire to the house, but could not go through with it, and left. Michael insisted Thomas had hired him to start a fire at the home on the 28th day, supposedly while Thomas and his family stayed at relatives' home, so that Thomas could collect fire insurance money. According to Michael, he arrived on the night in question to start the fire, only to find Kelly already dead. Frightened that he might be accused of the crime, he left without calling 911. As for his earlier confession, he claimed the police had written it themselves and that he had no knowledge of it. Michael's lawyer also emphasized Charlie's statement, pointing out that the person Charlie saw could have been Thomas, given that he wore clothes similar to her father and had his face covered, so it would have been difficult for a 7-year-old to identify him conclusively. However, the prosecution saw through Michael's new claims. First, he had already told them where he had discarded the physical evidence, and indeed they recovered the hammer and other items containing his deoxyribonucleic acid. It was impossible to deny his role in the killing. They also pointed out that Charlie actually said the individual looked like my dad, not that she was certain it was her father. Most decisively, the prosecution presented the hammer used as the murder weapon, along with evidence that Michael's deoxyribonucleic acid was found at the crime scene, securing a conviction. Michael was found guilty and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. 2 months after Michael's guilty verdict, on January 9, 2017, Thomas's trial began. A major issue quickly arose. There was no direct evidence linking Thomas to the murder, only circumstantial evidence. He insisted that he had not seen Michael since Michael resigned. Without firm proof, there was a risk Thomas could be acquitted. The prosecution needed to prove that Thomas had met with Michael right before the crime took place. They brought in a data analysis firm to investigate. As a result, they were able to show that starting 12 days before Kelly's death, the two men had met and kept in regular contact. More specifically, the firm developed a program that tracked movements by analyzing phone carrier records, search engine logs, and so on. They used this to prove the connection. In addition, they presented footage from Thomas's company's closed-circuit television, showing Thomas and Michael meeting in an underground parking area on the night of the murder. In the video, the two talked for a while. Then Michael drove away in a maroon-colored company vehicle, while Thomas got into his own car. The police tracked these cars and discovered that Michael's maroon vehicle headed toward Thomas's house, apparently waiting there to strike upon receiving the order. Still, Thomas continued to proclaim his innocence. Nevertheless, the court pronounced him guilty of first-degree murder. Finally, there was one more accomplice, a man named Mark. He was a neighborhood friend of Michael's who stood lookout during the killing, and he was indicted on those grounds. As for Kelly's two young children, Charlie and Cullen, whom she tried so desperately to shield in her final moments, they are said to be growing up safely with their aunt. They were 7 and 3 years old at the time of the incident, and reportedly, they are doing as well as can be hoped now. One wonders how a husband could take the life of his children's mother over money, and how Michael could respond to someone who treated him kindly with such an act of cruelty, especially while a small child was watching. This case lays bare how human selfishness and betrayal can lead to devastatingly tragic outcomes. And now the second story, which is just as impactful. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about the first story in the comments. I'll make sure to read every response. April 27th, 2008, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Hong Kong. 17-year-old Wang Jiamei leaves her home with a brief, "I'm off to work," to her parents. However, that day, the girl vanished without a trace. Her worried parents contacted the police only 2 days later on April 29th. Since Wang Jiamei was a minor, the police immediately classified the case as an abduction and began questioning the family. Right from the start of the investigation, the officers had questions. First, why did the parents raise the alarm only 2 days after their teenage daughter disappeared? Second, none of the family members knew exactly what kind of side job the girl was doing. The parents explained that Wang Jiamei had occasionally stayed over at friends' places before, so they hadn't been concerned about her absence. However, 2 days without contact was a first. When asked about the nature of her part-time job, the parents answered evasively. She worked somewhere to make some pocket money. What exactly she did, we don't know. The parents' indifference struck the police as odd. To locate Wang Jiamei and uncover what kind of work she was involved in, investigators decided to closely examine her computer, hoping to find any clues. Their efforts paid off. They were particularly intrigued by a suspicious online platform where Wang Jiamei was registered. It wasn't long before the police discovered that the girl had been involved in compensated dating, essentially providing sexual services for money. In essence, it is akin to prostitution, but dating sounds less vulgar and attracts many women in Hong Kong looking for easy money. Especially alarming was the fact that compensated dating had become widespread among teenagers. Online platforms that facilitate the organization of such dates do not require complicated registration procedures. All that's needed is to upload a photo, list interests and hobbies, and write a brief description about oneself. Interested parties can contact each other directly through the platform. Wang Jiamei registered on the site under the username Kimmy. Due to the lack of proper oversight on these sites, the involvement of minors in prostitution is rampant. When her parents learned about their daughter's activities, they categorically denied her involvement in anything like that. However, the reaction of Wang Jiamei's older sister was completely different. She became noticeably nervous, avoided eye contact, and seemed deeply uncomfortable. Finally, gathering her courage, she confessed, "My sister was involved in this, but only briefly, just for a little while to help the family financially." Wang Jiamei had a secret she couldn't share with anyone. She was born in China, where she experienced abuse and neglect from her biological father as a child. When she was 3 years old, her mother took the daughters and left home. In 2005, her mother met a man from Hong Kong, married him, and the whole family moved to Hong Kong. Wang Jiamei was 14 years old at the time, a difficult transitional age. Fortunately, she quickly adapted to her new life. She made friends at school, did well academically, and was considered a model student. However, at home, the situation remained tense. Wang Jiamei couldn't get along with her stepfather, often clashing with him. As a result, she began spending more and more time away from home and her grades started to slip. One day, Wang Jiamei suddenly told her sister, "I'm dropping out of school and will start making money to help mom." The family's financial situation was difficult. Hong Kong is known for its high cost of living and poor living conditions. The mother worked as a cleaner and did everything she could to support the family, but the money was still not enough. Wang Jiamei decided to contribute to the family budget. Her mother was categorically against it. She dreamed that her daughter would study hard and get into a prestigious university. However, reality was harsh. "You can't drop out of school, you need to study," her mother constantly repeated. The conflicts with her parents weighed heavily on Wang Jiamei, and she continued down her path of self-destruction. During this time, she learned about compensated dating, which was popular among her peers. The opportunity to quickly earn money by spending time with men was too tempting. Eventually, she took a step into the dark world. On the day of her disappearance, April 27th, Wang Jiamei logged into the dating site. The police focused on Wang Jiamei's chat correspondence and summoned a man named Ding Qitai for questioning. 24-year-old Ding owned a figurine shop and was the last person to have seen Wang Jiamei. When asked about that day, he responded evasively, "I don't remember well." However, he did share the following. The day before, on April 26th, he had been at a club where he consumed alcohol and a larger-than-usual dose of ecstasy. Ecstasy is a drug that stimulates the central nervous system and causes hallucinations. That night, Ding Qitai was extremely drunk and under the influence of drugs, and the next day he was still not fully recovered. At some point, he logged onto the online platform, where he came across Wang Jiamei's profile. Her photo caught his attention, and soon they met in person. Ding Qitai claimed that due to his condition, he remembered almost nothing about the meeting with Wang Jiamei. Such limited information raised even more suspicion. Based on Ding Qitai's testimony, the police were able to trace the address of the hotel where the two had met. In the room they rented, important evidence was found: blood traces on a chair and the bathroom curtain. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Wang Jiamei. Thus, in the room where the man and the missing girl had been, traces of the missing girl's blood were found. Ding Qitai went from being a witness to the prime suspect. At first, Ding Qitai behaved arrogantly, insisting that he remembered absolutely nothing due to the alcohol and drugs. He even pounded on the table, feigning despair and complete innocence. However, when he was informed about the traces of Wang Jiamei's blood found in the hotel room, his behavior changed dramatically. He then claimed that he and Wang Jiamei had taken drugs together in the room, and in the morning, he found her dead. Ding Qitai feared he would be accused of murder. Of course, if he were not involved in the girl's death, he would have immediately called the police. But there were things holding him back: the joint drug use and the fact that Wang Jiamei was a minor and involved in prostitution. So he decided to dispose of the body. He admitted to hiding the body but adamantly denied committing the murder. It was a classic criminal tactic. However, the police didn't fall for this and forced Ding Qitai to tell the full truth. So, what really happened? In the hotel room, Ding Qitai and Wang Jiamei took drugs together. Ding Qitai, already in a state of extreme excitement worsened by the ecstasy he had taken the day before, began to experience auditory and visual hallucinations, and panic set in. At that moment, he couldn't control his aggression. He attacked Wang Jiamei and began to strangle her. She tried to resist, but she was no match for him. Wang Jiamei suffocated. Realizing he had committed murder, Ding Qitai panicked and decided to cover up the crime. His actions were cold-blooded and decisive. He went to a supermarket where he bought everything he needed to dismember the body. Returning to the room, he began the horrific process. The body was divided into 3 parts: head, bones, and flesh. He ground up the internal organs and flushed them down the toilet. He wrapped the head in a towel and placed it in a bag, while the bones were thrown into the sea. What Ding Qitai did with the flesh was particularly cynical. He called a butcher shop and offered them pork. The dismembered remains of Wang Jiamei, disguised as pork, were delivered to the shop at a local market. To avoid suspicion, he mixed the remains with real pork. The question arises, how did the butcher not notice the substitution? When the police discovered this fact, they immediately headed to the market. "Do you still have the meat that was delivered to you that day?" they asked the vendor. But the meat had already been sold, and no trace of Wang Jiamei could be found. How could someone confuse human flesh with pork, even if they're not an expert? Doesn't this suggest the butcher's involvement in the crime? During questioning, the butcher swore he knew nothing and was simply selling what had been delivered to him. However, the public in Hong Kong was skeptical of his claims. Many believed that he might have suspected the origin of the meat but remained silent out of greed. Be that as it may, the fact remains. Someone purchased human flesh from that butcher shop. The police continued searching for any part of Wang Jiamei's body. Despite Ding Qitai's confession, physical evidence was still needed to formally charge him. Investigators combed through the area where Ding Qitai claimed to have discarded the bones, but storms and strong waves hampered the search efforts. The next focus of the investigation was the hotel. On May 9th, the police extracted a large amount of waste from the sewer and septic system. Suspicious materials were collected and sent for forensic examination. The volume of material gathered amounted to 30% of the total waste. A race against time began. If no trace of Wang Jiamei was found among the waste, all efforts would have been in vain. After long and excruciating hours of waiting, the forensic results finally arrived. Skin fragments and bone pieces were found in the waste. This was the long-awaited news. Additionally, parts of fingers and what was presumed to be Wang Jiamei's skull were also discovered. The police rejoiced, having found irrefutable evidence, but the girl's relatives could not share in this joy. Despite all the efforts, Wang Jiamei's head was never recovered. Thanks to the discovered evidence, Ding Qitai was charged with the murder of Wang Jiamei. In July 2009, after 2 months of trial proceedings, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Ding Qitai tried to seek leniency, citing his voluntary confession. However, the brutality of the crime left him with no chance. It seemed that with Ding Qitai's life sentence, the case was closed. However, the story had a continuation. The fact that Wang Jiamei's remains were sold in a butcher shop sparked mass panic among Hong Kong residents. People who had purchased meat from that shop were horrified by the thought that they might have eaten human flesh. Sales at the market dropped by half, and restaurants and bars in the surrounding area were left empty. Ding Qitai is still in prison. In 2011, he was punished for attacking another inmate, which once again proves that some people cannot be changed. The tragedy of Wang Jiamei made the people of Hong Kong reflect on the issue of compensated dating. According to experts, children from troubled families like Wang Jiamei's are more likely to seek love and attention. When combined with the opportunity to make money, it becomes difficult for them to resist temptation. Of course, not all children from difficult backgrounds are at risk, but it is crucial to prevent such tragedies. Adults must pay attention to children who lack love and support and help guide them away from dangerous paths. In conclusion, I would like to express condolences to the family and friends of Wang Jiamei, whose life and dreams were so cruelly cut short.